On a quiet summer evening, a young couple set out on what should have been a simple, carefree date night. They never returned home. By the next morning, their bodies were discovered in a remote wooded area, bearing signs of unimaginable torture. What unfolded in those missing hours was a night of pure horror and a crime that would haunt investigators for years to come. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to Criminal Minds Archives and turn on notifications so you never miss our deep dives into the darkest and most unsettling true crime cases. This is the story of a young couple who fell victim to a sadistic predator. A case that began with two people simply trying to enjoy an evening together, but ended with a chilling manhunt and disturbing revelations about what really happened on that long, harrowing night. It was late July in the small town of Maplewood, a suburban community tucked between rolling farmland and dense forest. The town was quiet, the kind of place where people left doors unlocked, neighbors waved across the street, and teenagers complained that there was nothing to do. For Samantha Blake, age 21, and Ethan Rivera, age 23, Maplewood had always been home. They'd grown up just blocks apart, went to the same high school, and after years of friendship, their bond had blossomed into something deeper. Both were young, full of plans, and deeply in love. That evening, Samantha and Ethan planned something simple: a drive to the local diner for milkshakes, followed by a walk through the town's Riverside Park. They texted Samantha's sister just before leaving, a cheerful message saying they'd be home around midnight. But midnight came and went. By morning, neither had returned. At first, Samantha's family thought maybe she'd stayed over at Ethan's house. Ethan's parents assumed the two had gone back to the Blake home. But by 8 a.m., when neither family had heard from them and calls went straight to voicemail, panic began to set in. Samantha's sister drove the route they would have taken to the diner. Nothing. No signs of the car, no trace of them. By 9:30 a.m., both families were on the phone with Maplewood Police Department, filing a missing persons report. Detective Laura Henderson, a veteran with nearly 20 years on the force, was assigned to the case. She had handled runaways before, even a few domestic disputes disguised as missing persons. But something about this felt different. Samantha and Ethan weren't the type to vanish. Two kids don't just disappear in Maplewood, Henderson would later say, not without someone noticing. Later that afternoon, a jogger cutting through Pine Hollow Forest, about 6 miles from town, stumbled upon something that made his stomach lurch. Near the tree line, just off a dirt service road, lay a burnt-out sedan. The metal frame was still warm, its paint blistered from fire. Inside, the jogger saw what he thought was a dark pile of fabric, but when he looked closer, he realized it was something far worse. The remains of Samantha and Ethan were inside. Police sealed off the area immediately. Even hardened detectives were shaken by the scene. The couple hadn't just been killed. They had been bound, tortured, and murdered with cruelty that suggested deep rage. Evidence inside the car and along the forest floor revealed chilling details of their final hours. Blood, duct tape, and discarded restraints told investigators this had been a prolonged ordeal. Someone had wanted them to suffer. The news spread quickly across Maplewood. Residents who once left doors unlocked began bolting them shut. Parents forbade their kids from going out after dark. Candlelight vigils were held in the town square as Samantha and Ethan's families clung to each other in grief and confusion. But behind the scenes, Detective Henderson and her team were piecing together a timeline. Who would want to hurt the young couple? Why such brutality? And how had they been taken, seemingly without a trace, from a quiet suburban street? Those answers, investigators would discover, lay hidden in a chilling trail of evidence, one that pointed to a killer who had been watching for weeks. The forensic team worked through the night at Pine Hollow Forest, documenting every shred of evidence. The burnt sedan was identified as Ethan's car, confirmed by the partial license plate and VIN number etched into the frame. Inside, the air was thick with the acrid smell of gasoline and charred fabric. Investigators found remnants of duct tape fused to the seats, along with melted fragments of zip ties. The back seat appeared soaked with blood, suggesting the couple had been restrained and assaulted before the fire was set. Nearby, discarded items gave more clues. A blood-stained cloth, a half-empty gas can, and tire impressions from another vehicle suggested that whoever had done this wasn't working alone, or, at the very least, had a getaway prepared. Detective Henderson later described the scene as one of the most brutal crime scenes I've ever stood in. Investigators worked quickly to piece together the couple's final movements. CCTV footage from the diner confirmed that Samantha and Ethan had arrived around 9:15 p.m. They were seen laughing, sharing milkshakes, and leaving together just before 10 p.m. From there, the trail went cold. No cameras picked them up along the roads leading home. Witnesses recalled nothing unusual except for one detail. A man who lived near the park reported hearing what he described as a loud, panicked scream around 10:30 p.m. He dismissed it at the time, assuming it was teenagers fooling around. But in hindsight, it may have been Samantha or Ethan fighting for their lives. The county medical examiner's findings sent shockwaves through the investigation. Both Samantha and Ethan bore clear signs of prolonged torture. Their wrists and ankles had deep ligature marks, consistent with being bound tightly for hours. Ethan had multiple blunt force injuries to the head and ribs, while Samantha had severe burns on her arms and legs, inflicted before death. The final cause of death for both was determined to be stabbing wounds to the chest. The examiner concluded they were killed shortly before the car was set on fire, likely between 3 a.m. and 4 a.m. That meant the couple had endured nearly 6 hours of captivity and torment before being murdered. The brutality of the crime raised urgent questions. This wasn't a robbery gone wrong. Their wallets, phones, and jewelry were all missing, but the sheer violence suggested something deeper. Detective Henderson explored several possibilities. Personal vendetta. Did someone close to Samantha or Ethan harbor resentment, perhaps a jealous ex or a feud with a friend? Random violence. Could it have been a thrill kill by strangers who simply crossed paths with the young couple that night? Targeted attack. Had they been stalked and deliberately chosen? Henderson leaned toward the third theory. The way the couple had been restrained, moved to a secluded location, tortured, and then disposed of suggested planning. This was no impulsive crime. Detectives began interviewing friends, ex-partners, and co-workers. Ethan was described as kind and easygoing, with no enemies anyone could name. Samantha was equally well-liked, though she had recently confided in her sister about a strange incident. Just 2 weeks before her death, Samantha told her sister that she thought someone was following her. On her drive home from work, she noticed a dark SUV in her rearview mirror for several miles. The vehicle eventually turned off, but the experience left her unsettled. Her sister brushed it off at the time, assuming it was just paranoia, but now it felt like a chilling foreshadowing. 2 days after the bodies were found, detectives combed through traffic cameras positioned on the main highway leaving town. At 11:02 p.m. on the night of the disappearance, one camera captured Ethan's sedan pulling onto the highway. Following closely behind was a black SUV. The SUV had no front license plate, but investigators noted a distinctive dent in the hood and a missing headlight cover. This discovery electrified the task force. They now had proof that the couple was followed that night and possibly abducted by whoever was inside that SUV. Detective Henderson ordered her team to cross-check local reports involving suspicious vehicles. Within days, they found something chilling. Multiple women in neighboring towns had reported being followed late at night by a dark SUV matching the description. Most of the women had managed to lose the car or reach safety, but the reports indicated a clear pattern someone was prowling the area, targeting young women. Now it seemed that predator had escalated. The question investigators faced was terrifying. Who was behind the wheel of that SUV? And more importantly, had they killed before? With the CCTV footage in hand, investigators launched a countywide search for black SUVs with front-end damage. Local repair shops were contacted, and police canvassed neighborhoods, asking residents if they'd seen a vehicle matching the description. Within 72 hours, a tip came in. A mechanic in the nearby town of Grayson reported that just a week earlier, a man had brought in a black Chevy Tahoe with a cracked headlight and dented hood. The man paid in cash, seemed nervous, and insisted the work be done quickly, no paperwork needed. The mechanic remembered his face clearly. That detail would prove crucial. Through cross-checks of local offenders and DMV records, police identified the man as Derek Coleman, 25 years old. Coleman had a long but relatively minor criminal history, petty theft, drug possession, and a bar fight or two. Nothing in his past hinted at the sadistic violence that now loomed over him. Detectives began surveillance on Coleman. His SUV matched the description, right down to the dent, but the interior had been meticulously cleaned, almost unnaturally spotless. To seasoned investigators, this was a red flag. Criminals clean their cars, sure, Detective Henderson later said, but this one looked like it had been scrubbed for a hospital ward. That told us he was hiding something. Coleman was brought in for questioning under the guise of a routine vehicle inquiry. At first, he played it cool, denying any involvement, and insisting he'd been home the night of the murders. But detectives noticed his story kept shifting. First, he said he'd been watching TV. Then he claimed he'd gone for a late-night drive. When pressed, he couldn't produce anyone who could vouch for his whereabouts between 10 p.m. and 4 a.m. The interrogation room grew tense. Henderson described Coleman's demeanor as cold, detached, like he wasn't even processing that 2 kids had been slaughtered. Without hard evidence, though, they couldn't hold him. Coleman walked out of the station a free man, but Henderson knew they had their prime suspect. While Coleman tried to maintain his innocence, forensic teams were still combing through the burnt sedan. After days of painstaking analysis, they made a breakthrough. Underneath the layers of soot and ash, technicians recovered a fragment of duct tape with a partial fingerprint. It was degraded, but usable. When the print was run through the state database, it came back as a match to Derek Coleman. This was the smoking gun investigators needed. A search warrant was executed on Coleman's home. Inside, detectives uncovered a stash of disturbing items. Several rolls of duct tape identical to what was used on the victims. A collection of knives, one of which had traces of blood later confirmed to be Ethan's. And perhaps most chilling of all, a notebook filled with violent fantasies, detailed writings about abducting, torturing, and killing young couples. The notebook was filled with dates, sketches, and crude maps of secluded areas. Some entries even described following women home from work, eerily similar to Samantha's account just weeks before her death. This wasn't just a killer. This was a predator who had been fantasizing and planning for months, maybe years. Armed with physical evidence, forensic matches, and the disturbing writings, police moved in. Derek Coleman was arrested outside his home in the early hours of the morning. Neighbors described the scene as surreal flashing lights, armed officers swarming the street. Coleman dragged out in handcuffs with a blank, emotionless expression. When charged with the murders of Samantha Blake and Ethan Rivera, Coleman showed no reaction, no denial, no protest, just a cold stare. No, as investigators dug deeper, a disturbing backstory began to surface. Coleman had grown up in a broken household. His father was violent, his mother absent. As a teenager, he was known for cruelty to animals and a fascination with horror and gore. He dropped out of school, drifting into petty crime, drugs, and isolation. But what truly alarmed detectives was a sealed juvenile record that revealed a prior assault on a classmate at age 16. The victim had been tied up and beaten, eerily similar to the methods used on Samantha and Ethan. Coleman was sent to a youth facility, but released after just 18 months. To Detective Henderson, it painted a clear picture. Derek Coleman had been escalating his violence for years. The murders of Samantha and Ethan weren't a sudden act of rage. They were the culmination of a long, twisted path toward sadistic violence. When news broke of Coleman's arrest, Maplewood residents felt both relief and horror. Relief that the killer was caught. Horror that someone so disturbed had been living quietly among them. Parents remembered seeing him at grocery stores. Neighbors recalled his SUV parked outside his rundown rental house. Nobody had suspected that behind the blank stare was a predator capable of such cruelty. For Samantha and Ethan's families, the arrest brought little comfort. Justice might be coming, but nothing could erase the pain of what their children endured that night. But the investigation was far from over. Detectives soon discovered evidence suggesting that Samantha and Ethan may not have been Coleman's only intended victims. With Derek Coleman in custody, prosecutors began building a case that would leave no room for doubt. The forensic evidence, the fingerprint on the duct tape, Ethan's blood on the knife, and Coleman's disturbing notebook formed a devastating foundation. But the case wasn't just about proving Coleman had killed Samantha and Ethan. It was about exposing the level of cruelty, planning, and obsession that had fueled his crimes. The district attorney's office decided to pursue first-degree murder with special circumstances, opening the door to the harshest possible sentence. The trial began nearly a year after the murders. The courtroom was packed. On the first day, family members of the victims sitting shoulder to shoulder with curious townsfolk and local reporters. Coleman entered in shackles, dressed in a plain suit provided by his defense team. His expression was blank, his eyes scanning the room without emotion. Some described him as detached, almost bored. The prosecutor's opening statement was blunt. This man did not just kill Samantha Blake and Ethan Rivera. He hunted them, he kidnapped them, he tortured them, and then he tried to erase every trace of their suffering by fire. But the evidence he left behind tells the story of a sadistic predator who must never walk free again. One of the most heart-wrenching moments of the trial came when Samantha's mother took the stand. Her voice cracked as she described the night her daughter went missing. The frantic search and the crushing reality of learning how Samantha had died. Ethan's father followed, his grief spilling over into anger. He stole my son's future. He made them suffer in ways no human being should suffer. I want everyone to know what kind of monster sits at that table. Their testimonies left the jury visibly shaken. Forensic experts walked the jury through every detail. The duct tape with Coleman's fingerprint. The knife with Ethan's blood. The SUV, scrubbed clean but still harboring microscopic traces of Samantha's DNA. The notebook filled with fantasies of torture, maps of secluded areas, and chilling sketches of bound figures. When the prosecutor held the notebook up before the jury, the courtroom fell silent. The words inside were depraved descriptions of breaking them slowly and making them beg. The entries matched the timeline of Samantha and Ethan's abduction almost exactly. Coleman's defense team tried to argue that the evidence was circumstantial. They suggested the fingerprint on the duct tape could have been from a different time, that the blood on the knife might have been transferred, and that the notebook was nothing more than disturbing fiction. But their arguments struggled against the weight of the evidence. The jury had seen too much. When asked if Coleman wished to testify, he declined. He sat silently throughout the proceedings, staring straight ahead, his face devoid of remorse. Just when the trial seemed straightforward, the prosecution introduced a surprise witness, a young woman named Tiana Roberts. Tiana testified that weeks before the murders, she believed Coleman had followed her home from work. She recalled the same black SUV trailing her late at night, pulling up beside her at a stop sign. She managed to turn quickly into a gas station, where the vehicle sped off. What chilled the courtroom was her recollection of seeing the driver's face in the SUV's window. It was him, she said, pointing directly at Coleman. Her testimony supported the prosecution's argument that Coleman had been stalking women, waiting for the right opportunity to strike. Samantha and Ethan, tragically, had crossed his path at the wrong time. After weeks of testimony and deliberation, the jury returned. The courtroom sat in silence as the foreperson read the verdict. Guilty on all counts. The families embraced, tears streaming down their faces. For them, it was the closest thing to justice they would ever receive. When asked if he had anything to say before sentencing, Coleman finally spoke. His words sent a chill through the courtroom. They weren't the first, and they wouldn't have been the last. Gasps rippled through the room. Some jurors later admitted they had nightmares about that moment for months. The judge, visibly shaken, sentenced Coleman to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Given his words at sentencing, prosecutors had considered pushing for the death penalty, but the families requested otherwise. They wanted him to live with the weight of his crimes, to wake up every day in a cage, stripped of freedom, never again able to harm another person. Though justice had been served, Maplewood was never the same. Parents became hyper-vigilant. Couples thought twice before late-night walks. And for Samantha and Ethan's families, the grief was a permanent shadow. Detective Henderson later reflected, "It wasn't just about catching Coleman. It was about making sure the world saw what monsters can hide in plain sight, and reminding people that evil doesn't always wear a mask. Sometimes it's the man living right down the street. But one lingering question still haunts investigators. Were Samantha and Ethan truly Coleman's first victims? Because hidden within his notebook were references to other names, other places, and other nights. And to this day, those questions remain unanswered. Even after Derek Coleman's conviction, investigators could not shake the possibility that Samantha and Ethan weren't his only intended victims, or perhaps even his first. The notebook discovered in his home contained cryptic entries that prosecutors never fully unraveled. Pages listed names that did not correspond to any known friends or acquaintances. There were vague references to nights spent watching and waiting. One entry, dated nearly a year before the murders, included the chilling line, "Got close this time, they didn't see me." Detectives attempted to trace these notes to potential missing persons cases, but nothing conclusive ever surfaced. Some believe Coleman exaggerated his fantasies in writing, while others suspect there may still be unidentified victims out there. For families who have lost loved ones in unsolved disappearances across the region, Coleman's name remains a dark possibility. Samantha Blake's family channeled their grief into advocacy. They founded the Samantha Blake Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to supporting families of missing persons and pushing for greater public awareness about stalking behaviors. Her sister often speaks at community events, urging people to take seriously any feeling of being followed or watched. Samantha told me once she thought someone was following her. "I wish I had listened harder. I'll spend the rest of my life making sure other families don't miss those signs." Ethan Rivera's parents created a scholarship fund in his name, supporting local students pursuing careers in criminal justice. His father said he wanted Ethan's legacy to inspire the kind of investigators who could stop predators before they struck. For Detective Laura Henderson, the case of Samantha and Ethan left permanent scars. Though she had solved countless cases in her career, this one haunted her. She admitted in later interviews that it was the sheer length of the couple's suffering that weighed most heavily. "We usually think of murder as something sudden, but this wasn't sudden. They endured hours of pain, fear, and hope that maybe they'd survive. Knowing that will never leave me." She kept one photograph of Samantha and Ethan in her office until her retirement, a silent reminder of why she never stopped fighting for victims. Maplewood, once a quiet town of unlocked doors, changed in the wake of the murders. The forest where the car was found is now avoided by locals, whispered about in hushed tones. Parents still warn their children about the dangers of walking alone at night, always citing Samantha and Ethan's names. Every year on the anniversary of their deaths, the town holds a candlelight vigil at the Riverside Park where the couple was last seen alive. Hundreds gather to honor their memory, standing side by side with flickering candles against the night. The pain is still there, but so too is resilience. True crime is often about the horror of the act itself, but beyond the brutality, there are always deeper lessons. The case of Samantha Blake and Ethan Rivera reminds us that evil can hide in plain sight in a neighbor, in a stranger's vehicle on a dark road, in someone who seems forgettable until it's too late. It reminds us, too, of the importance of listening to our instincts. Samantha felt she was being watched. She wasn't wrong. And it reminds us of the strength of families, communities, and investigators who fight to bring justice even when the wounds will never fully heal. This has been the tragic case of Samantha Blake and Ethan Rivera, a young couple whose lives were stolen in one night of unimaginable horror. If you found this story impactful, please consider subscribing to Criminal Minds Archives. We bring you the deepest, most unsettling true crime stories from around the world. Stories that remind us of the darkness that exists and the light we must hold on to. Stay safe, trust your instincts, and never forget Samantha and Ethan.